Isabella's shoulder slammed into the vault door as two men dragged her backward by the arms, her shoes skidding across marble slick with spilled wine from an overturned tray. "Let go of me," she gasped, twisting hard enough that one man lost his grip on her wrist, and for half a second she was free, until a third hand closed around her throat and shoved her flat against cold steel. "Where's the code?" the man hissed, his breath sour with cigarettes. "You've been in here every night this week. Don't lie to me." "I cleaned this house," Isabella spat back, chin lifted despite the fingers pressing into her skin. "That's my job. Yours is apparently strangling housekeepers over nothing." A door crashed open somewhere down the hall, boots pounding closer, and if you've ever been underestimated by people who think they already know your whole story, stick around, because Isabella is about to prove every single one of them wrong, and you won't want to miss how. The footsteps stopped just short of the vault room, and the man's hand loosened a fraction as Dante Moretti stepped into the doorway, filling it entirely, ink crawling up from his open collar toward his jaw. "Explain," he said. "One word." The room went still around it. "She was in a vault, boss. Alone. Door was already cracked open when we found her." Dante's eyes moved to Isabella last, deliberately last, like he was making a point of not rushing to conclusions in front of his men, even though something in his jaw tightened the moment he saw the bruise already blooming under her collarbone. "Get your hands off her," he said, quiet, and the man let go so fast Isabella nearly stumbled. She caught herself against the vault door, breathing hard, refusing to rub her throat where his grip had been even though it throbbed. "Thank you," she said, voice flat, "for noticing I was being choked in your own house." "Why were you in my vault, Isabella?" "Ask your mother," she said. "Oh, wait. You can't." The silence that followed had weight to it. One of the men shifted uncomfortably. Dante's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, a flicker, gone almost before it registered. "My mother has been dead 6 months," he said slowly. "What does she have to do with anything in that room?" Isabella said nothing. She'd promised. A promise made to a dying woman, holding her hand so tightly it left marks, in a hospice room that smelled like antiseptic and lilies, was not something she was going to hand over to a man who'd just watched the soldiers put hands on her and said nothing until it was almost too late. "Clear the room," Dante said, and his men filed out without a word, though the one who'd grabbed her throat glanced back at her once, something like confusion crossing his face, like he'd expected her to be relieved, not angrier than before. When they were alone, Dante crossed his arms, tattoos shifting over muscle, and studied her the way he might study a ledger that didn't balance. "You've worked in this house 2 years," he said. "Cleaned every room in it. I've never once had reason to question you until tonight. So I'm going to ask you again, and this time I'd like an answer instead of a riddle. Why were you standing in front of my vault at 11 o'clock at night?" "Because I told her I would." "Told who?" "Your mother." Isabella pushed off the vault door, straightening her uniform, refusing to let her hands shake even though adrenaline was still burning through her. "She grabbed my wrist the last week she was alive and made me swear that if anyone ever tried to open that vault who shouldn't, I would stop them, even if it was you." Dante went very still. "Especially me." "She didn't say your name," Isabella said, and that, at least, was true. She said my son, if he's not ready. I didn't understand what she meant. I still don't. I just made a promise to a woman who was kind to me when no one else in this house bothered to learn my name. Something in his face cracked, just slightly, just at the edges. "She was kind to you. She used to bring me tea in the mornings before your staff was even awake. So the house felt colder when nobody talked to the people who kept it running." Isabella's voice caught, and she hated that it did, hated giving him that much. She was dying, and she still thought about that. "So yes, when she asked me to protect something, I said yes. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't ask why. I just said yes." Dante looked at the vault door like he was seeing it for the first time in years, and when he spoke again his voice had lost its edge, gone rougher, quieter. "There's a code on that vault only 2 people alive know. My mother had one. I have the other." He looked back at Isabella, and this time the flicker in his eyes didn't disappear. It stayed, unreadable, dangerous in a different way than before. which means somebody else got in tonight. Somebody who isn't standing in this room. Isabella's stomach dropped. That's impossible. It's not impossible, Dante said, already moving past her toward the panel beside the vault, fingers hovering over the keypad. It's already happened. The screen blinked red. 3 failed access attempts logged an hour before she'd even arrived to start her shift, and directly beneath them, a 4th entry, successful, timestamped 20 minutes before his men found her standing guard over a door that had already been opened and quietly closed again by someone wearing gloves. Dante's jaw locked as he stared at the log, the red text reflecting in his eyes like something venomous. 20 minutes before you got here, he said. Someone was already inside, which means whoever it was had time to take something and leave you standing here to take the blame for it. I didn't touch anything, Isabella said, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her not to crowd a man built like a wall of muscle and old grudges. I got here, the door was already open a crack, and I closed it and stood in front of it because that's what I promised. I never went inside. Convenient story. It's the truth, whether or not it's convenient for you to believe it. He turned to face her fully then, and for the first time she saw past the tattoos and the reputation to something rawer underneath, a man scrambling to hold together a structure that had just shown him a crack in its foundation. Do you understand what's in there? He said. Do you have any idea what you were guarding? No, Isabella admitted. She never told me. I told you that already. Then why does it matter to you? He pushed, voice sharpening again. Enough to let 3 of my men choke you against a steel door rather than step aside? Isabella's chin lifted. Because she mattered to me. Is that so hard to understand? Some of us don't need to know what's valuable to know that a promise is. Before Dante could answer, the door at the end of the hall opened, and a woman's heels clicked against the marble with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd never once doubted she belonged in every room she entered. Camilla, Dante's fiancée. Her eyes swept the scene. The broken tray, the red keypad, Isabella's disheveled uniform, and settled last on Dante with an expression of practiced concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. What happened? She asked, though something in her tone suggested she already had a guess and was only waiting to see if anyone would contradict it. Someone accessed the vault tonight without authorization, Dante said, before Isabella arrived. The maid, Camilla said, like the word itself was an accusation, was standing guard over a vault she has no business being anywhere near. Dante, I've said this before, you give this staff too much freedom in this house. She was protecting it, Dante said, and something in his tone made Camilla's eyes narrow slightly, like she hadn't expected him to defend her at all. Protecting it from whom? Herself. Isabella felt heat rise up her neck, not from embarrassment this time, but from something closer to fury. I'm standing right here, she said. You can ask me directly instead of talking over me, like furniture. Camilla's smile was thin, practiced, the kind that had probably disarmed rooms full of men who mistook elegance for warmth. How resourceful, she said. A housekeeper with opinions. Enough, Dante said, and the single word landed hard enough that both women fell silent. He turned back to the keypad, scrolling through the access log again, his brow furrowing at something Isabella couldn't see from where she stood. The entry code used tonight, he said slowly, isn't mine, and it isn't my mother's. Camilla's face didn't move, but her hand, resting against the doorframe, tightened just slightly enough that Isabella, trained by 2 years of reading rooms full of people who didn't want to be read, caught it. Then whose is it? Camilla asked too smoothly. That's what I intend to find out, Dante said, and for a moment his eyes cut toward her, just briefly, just long enough that Isabella wondered if he'd noticed the same flicker she had. Then he looked away, and the moment passed, and Isabella found herself wondering if she'd imagined it. I need to speak with Isabella alone, Dante said. Surely that's unnecessary, Camilla said. The staff can be questioned by security in the morning. There's no need for you to. Alone, Dante repeated, and something in the flatness of his voice ended the conversation before it could become one. Camilla's eyes flicked once more to Isabella, a look that lasted only a second but carried the full weight of a warning. Before she turned on her heel and walked back the way she'd come, heels striking the marble like small, deliberate detonations. When the door clicked shut behind her, Dante exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders, though his eyes stayed hard. "You saw that," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Saw what?" "Don't do that. Don't pretend you missed it." Her hand on the doorframe. Isabella hesitated, unsure how much honesty was safe to give a man she'd known for 2 years only as a shadow passing through hallways, never once as someone who asked her opinion about anything. She reacted like someone protecting a secret. Isabella said finally. "Whether that means she opened the vault herself, I couldn't tell you. But you think it's possible." "I think," Isabella said carefully, "that the woman standing in that doorway looked far more worried about what you'd find than about what happened to me. And I was the one who got choked tonight." Dante's eyes moved over her again, differently this time. Not suspicion, but something closer to reassessment, like a man realizing the person he'd been ready to blame might be the only one in the house who'd told him the truth all night. "Come with me," he said abruptly, already moving toward the door. "If someone got into that vault before you arrived, there's a service corridor camera that would have caught them. I want to see the footage before Camilla has time to make sure it disappears." The service corridor was narrow, lit by a single flickering bulb, and Isabella had to jog to keep pace with Dante's long strides as he pulled up the security feed on a tablet clutched in one tattooed hand. "There," he said, stopping so abruptly she nearly collided with his back. "Right there." The footage was grainy, timestamp an hour before her shift began. A figure in a dark hoodie moved down the corridor toward the vault room, face angled away from the camera with practiced precision. Someone who knew exactly where the blind spots were. "That's not proof of anything," Isabella said. "Could be any of you men. None of my men move like that." Dante's thumb paused the footage, zooming in on the figure's hand as it reached for the keypad. A ring caught the light, small, antique, unmistakable even through the pixelated blur. "I know that ring." "Whose is it?" Dante didn't answer right away. His silence stretched long enough that Isabella found herself studying his face instead of the screen, watching something shift behind his eyes, recognition curdling slowly into something like grief. "It was my mother's engagement ring," he said finally. "She left it to whoever she wanted to inherit her share of the family holdings. I always assumed that meant me." "You gave it to Camilla," Isabella said quietly. "It wasn't a question anymore. I proposed with it 6 months ago, before my mother died." His voice had gone rough, stripped of its earlier authority. "She insisted. Said Camilla deserved to feel like part of this family properly, not just an outsider marrying into it." "So the woman in that footage was wearing my mother's ring," Dante finished. "To open a vault, only 2 people were supposed to be able to access, meaning either Camilla stole a third code from somewhere, or my mother gave it to her willingly before she died and never told me." Isabella watched him grapple with that, watched a man who commanded rooms with a single word suddenly look, for just a moment, like someone standing on ground that had quietly turned to sand beneath him. She didn't reach for him. She barely knew him, and 2 years of scrubbing his floors hadn't earned her that right. But something in her softened anyway, some instinct she hadn't expected to have toward a man who, an hour ago, had accused her of theft. "There's only one way to know which," she said. "Ask her, directly, before she has time to build a story that fits whatever you already suspect." Dante's eyes cut to her, sharp again, assessing. "You're very confident giving advice for someone who was nearly strangled in my house tonight." "I'm very confident," Isabella said, "because I've spent 2 years watching people in this house lie to each other's faces while smiling. I know what it looks like. Camilla's been doing it since the moment she walked into that room." Something almost like a laugh escaped him, short, humorless, surprised out of him despite everything. "You don't like her. I don't trust her. There's a difference, though in her case, they seem to be the same thing." If you were standing where Isabella was right now, holding a secret that could burn down the whole house of cards around you, and the only person who might believe you is the man everyone warned you never to cross, what would you do? Tell us in the comments, because Isabella's about to make a choice that changes everything. Dante set the tablet down on a shelf, dragging a hand down his face, tattoos flexing over the muscle of his forearm. "If she's been lying to me," he said, more to himself than to Isabella. Then everything since my mother's funeral has been a performance. The grief, the wedding planning, all of it. I can't tell you that, Isabella said gently. I only know what I saw tonight. The rest is yours to find out. He looked at her then, really looked, in a way that made her suddenly conscious of the dried blood at her collar where the tray had cut her, the bruise darkening at her throat, the 2 years of invisibility she'd worn like armor in this house finally, inexplicably, cracking open under the weight of his attention. Why did you keep the promise? He asked quietly. You could have told my men everything the second they grabbed you, handed them Camilla's name, or at least a suspicion, and saved yourself a bruised throat. Instead, you said nothing and let them drag you across the floor. Because a promise made to someone who's dying isn't a promise you get to negotiate the terms of after the fact, Isabella said. Your mother trusted me with something. I wasn't going to let 3 men who've never once looked me in the eye decide whether that trust meant anything. Dante didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out, slowly, like he expected her to flinch away, and brush his thumb, just barely, against the bruise blooming at her collarbone. This shouldn't have happened to you, he said, voice low. Not in my house. Not under my watch. Isabella's breath caught, and for one unsteady second neither of them moved. The corridor's flickering bulb casting shadows that made the moment feel smaller, more private than it had any right to be given, everything unraveling around them. Then the tablet on the shelf buzzed. An alert, sharp and intrusive, and Dante's hand fell away as he turned to look at it, his expression hardening instantly back into something guarded. Motion sensor, he said. Someone's back in the vault room. Right now. Dante was already moving, the tablet abandoned on the shelf, his footsteps eating up the corridor with a speed that forced Isabella into a run just to keep him in sight. Stay behind me, he said over his shoulder, and for once she didn't argue, adrenaline sharpening every sound. Her own breathing, the distant murmur of a voice inside the vault room, low and urgent, cut off the moment they rounded the corner. The vault door stood open. Camilla stood inside it, a leather satchel half-packed in her hands, and for one frozen second nobody spoke. Explain, Dante said, echoing the exact word he'd used on Isabella an hour earlier. Except this time his voice shook with something underneath the command. Betrayal tried to disguise itself as control. Dante, I can explain everything, but not like this, not with her standing here. She stays. His voice left no room for negotiation. You're the one who needs to start explaining. Starting with why you're wearing my mother's ring on a chain around your neck instead of on your finger, where I put it. Camilla's hand flew instinctively to her throat, confirming what Isabella had already suspected, that the ring in the footage and the one Camilla now wore hidden beneath her blouse were the same. It's not what it looks like. It looks like you used a stolen code to break into a vault you have no legal claim to, Dante said, stepping further inside. Packed a bag of its contents, and were planning to disappear before anyone noticed. Correct me if I've misunderstood any part of that. Your mother gave me this ring herself, Camilla snapped, some of her composure cracking at last. 2 weeks before she died. She said if anything ever happened to her, I needed to access what was rightfully mine. Rightfully yours, Dante repeated, disbelief sharpening every syllable. We weren't even married yet. We would have been. And your mother knew things about this family's finances that you never bothered to ask about. Dante, money moved through accounts with your father's signature on them that never should have existed. She was going to expose it before she died, and I convinced her not to because it would have destroyed everything you built. I was protecting you by stealing from me, by making sure that when the truth came out, it came out on my terms, not dumped into the hands of some housekeeper who has no idea what she's holding. Camilla's eyes cut to Isabella with pure venom now, all pretense of composure gone. Did she tell you that part, Dante? That your precious mother trusted her, a maid, with information she wouldn't even give her own son? She didn't trust me with information, Isabella said quietly, refusing to let Camilla's contempt land. She trusted me with a promise to protect whatever was in here from people exactly like you. Dante crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the satchel from Camilla's hands before she could react, appending its contents onto the small table bolted to the vault's back wall. Bundles of documents spilled out, bank statements, wire transfers, a leather-bound ledger with his father's handwriting crammed into every margin. And beneath all of it, a sealed envelope with Dante's name written in his mother's unmistakable, looping script. Camilla lunged for the envelope. Dante caught her wrist before she reached it, his grip firm but not unkind, more exhausted than angry now. "You've had 8 years with this family," he said. 8 years to tell me the truth about anything. Instead, you waited until my mother was dead, and I was too grieving to ask the right questions. Because the truth would have ended us, Camilla said, and for the first time her voice cracked with something that sounded almost like real feeling. Your father embezzled from 3 different fronts to cover a debt he never told you about. If that ledger becomes public or worse, ends up in the wrong hands, it's not just embarrassing, Dante, it's a war. Every family we do business with will smell blood. So your solution was to steal it and disappear. My solution was to handle it quietly, the way this family has always handled things, before some maid with a guilty conscience decided to hand it to the wrong person out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to a dead woman she barely knew. She wasn't a stranger to me, Isabella said, sharper now, done being spoken over. She brought me tea. She asked about my mother's health when nobody else in this house remembered I had one. You spent 8 years planning a wedding and apparently never once had that kind of conversation with her. Or you'd have known she'd never trust you with something this important. Camilla's face twisted, ugly for just a moment before she caught herself. And in that unguarded second, Dante seemed to see her clearly for the first time. Not the elegant, composed woman he'd proposed to, but someone who'd spent years managing him rather than loving him. He released her wrist slowly, stepping back like he needed the distance. Get out of my house, he said. Quiet. Final. Dante, I said get out. Before I decide the ledger isn't the only thing that needs to see daylight tonight. Camilla's eyes darted between him and Isabella one last time, calculation flickering behind the panic. And then she was moving, heels striking hard and fast against the marble as she fled the room without another word, leaving Dante standing amid scattered documents and a decade of buried lies, his mother's sealed letter still clutched in his hand, unopened. Are you going to read it? Isabella asked softly. Dante stared at the envelope like it might detonate. I don't know what I'm more afraid of, he admitted. What's inside it? Or the fact that the only person I trust enough to be standing here while I open it is a woman I accused of theft 3 hours ago. Behind them, unnoticed by either, the vault's motion sensor blinked red again. A second alert, silent this time, logging one more presence that had slipped into the house through the service entrance while everyone's attention had been fixed entirely on Camilla. Dante's thumb slid beneath the envelope's seal, and Isabella watched his hands, steady in every crisis she'd witnessed tonight, tremble slightly as he unfolded the letter inside. He read in silence for a long moment, his jaw working before he spoke. She knew, he said, about my father's debts. About all of it. She'd been quietly paying off pieces of it for years without telling anyone, using accounts under her own name so it would never trace back to the family publicly. That's why she needed someone to guard the vault, Isabella said slowly, understanding arriving in pieces. Not to hide the evidence, to protect the proof that she'd been the one holding this family together. She writes that if Camilla ever tried to access this room, it would mean she'd chosen greed over loyalty, and that I should trust whoever stood between Camilla and the truth. Even if it was, and I'm quoting her exactly, someone this house has spent 2 years failing to see. Dante looked up from the page, something raw and unguarded in his expression. She meant you. She knew, somehow, that you'd be the one standing here. Isabella's throat tightened, tears rising unexpectedly at the thought of the frail woman who'd smiled at her every morning over a shared pot of tea, quietly orchestrating a final act of protection from a hospice bed. She never told me any of this, she said. Just made me promise. Because she trusted your character more than she trusted anyone's convenience, Dante said, including mine. A floorboard creaked in the hallway behind them. Wrong, out of place, too heavy to be Camilla's retreating heels. Dante's whole body shifted instantly, letter forgotten, positioning himself between Isabella and the doorway with the reflexive speed of a man who'd survived exactly this kind of moment before. "Someone else is in the house," he said quietly. The second alert, Isabella breathed, remembering the blinking sensor neither of them had acknowledged. "You said the system logged another." A man stepped into the doorway before she could finish, gun already raised, face half-shadowed, but unmistakably unfamiliar. Not one of Dante's men. "Moretti," the man said, almost pleasantly, like they were old acquaintances meeting for coffee instead of standing in a ransacked vault at midnight. "Your fiancé called ahead. Said you'd be distracted tonight." She wasn't wrong. "Whoever's paying you," Dante said, voice gone dangerously level, "isn't paying you enough to be standing in this room right now." The Calabrese family disagrees. "Your father owed them more than money, Moretti. He owed them silence about a shipment that went missing 11 years ago, and that ledger on the table behind you happens to prove exactly who is responsible." The man's eyes flicked to Isabella, assessing, dismissive. "Who's she?" "Hired help. She's under my protection," Dante said, and something in his tone made even Isabella's pulse skip. Not fear this time, but the sudden, dizzying realization that he meant it absolutely. "Touching. Doesn't change why I'm here." The man gestured with the gun toward the table. "Ledger. Now, and whatever's in that envelope you're holding, since apparently your mother liked keeping receipts." Isabella's mind raced, cataloging exits, weapons, anything. 2 years of scrubbing this house's floors had taught her every hidden passage the staff used to move unseen, corridors built for servants to disappear through walls that looked solid to everyone else. Her eyes found the service panel disguised as wood paneling behind the intruder, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. "If you shoot either of us," Dante said, stalling, buying time Isabella didn't yet have a plan to use, "you lose your only leverage. The Calabrese family wants this quiet. A body in my vault isn't quiet. The Calabrese family wants the ledger. What happens to you afterward is negotiable." The man's finger tightened almost imperceptibly on the trigger, and Isabella made her decision in the half-second before he could finish the thought. Lunging sideways toward the service panel, slamming her palm against the release she'd used 100 times to move laundry through the walls unseen, and the panel swung open with a groan loud enough to rip the intruder's attention away from Dante for one critical instant. It was enough. Dante moved like something unleashed, closing the distance before the gun could re-level, and the room dissolved into a blur of motion. A struggle for the weapon, a grunt of pain, the ledger and scattered documents crushed underfoot as both men crashed into the table. A shot fired, deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet burying itself somewhere in the vault's steel wall instead of flesh. And Isabella's heart stopped entirely until she saw Dante still standing, the gun now wrenched from the intruder's grip and pointed steadily back at him. "Tell the Calabrese family," Dante said, breathing hard, blood trickling from a split lip, "that the next person they send won't leave this house walking." The intruder, disarmed and cornered, raised both hands slowly, but Isabella caught the flicker of something calculating in his eyes, even as he backed toward the door, the look of a man already rehearsing his next move rather than accepting defeat. "This isn't over, Moretti. There's more where I came from." Camilla made sure of that before she left. He fled into the darkness of the corridor, and Dante didn't chase him, didn't dare leave the vault, and Isabella, unguarded, but the words hung in the air between them, heavier than the gunpowder smell still thick in the room. Isabella pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heart to slow, and found Dante's eyes already on her, wide with something that hadn't been there an hour ago. "You could have run," he said, when he pointed that gun at me. "You had a way out right behind you, and you used it to help me instead." "I told you already," Isabella said, voice unsteady but certain. "I don't abandon what I've promised to protect." Somewhere between tonight and an hour ago, that promise stopped being just about your mother. Dante crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gun still loose in his hand, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the aftermath of violence settling into something quieter, more dangerous in its own way than the fight itself. "Say that again," he said. Which part? The part where I stopped being just a promise to my mother. Isabella's breath caught at the rawness in his voice, so different from the guarded authority he'd worn like armor since the moment they'd met tonight. You heard me the first time. I want to hear it when I'm not bleeding and half convinced I imagined it. Before she could answer, footsteps thundered down the corridor. Dante's men this time. Alerted finally by the gunshot, filling the doorway with weapons drawn until they saw their boss standing, bloodied but upright, and lowered them at once. "Boss, we heard. Camilla's gone," Dante said, voice snapping back into command even as his eyes stayed fixed on Isabella. "Find her. She sold information to the Calabrese family, and there's a man loose in this house who won't be the last one they send. I want the perimeter locked down and every exit watched by sunrise." His men scattered to obey, and in the sudden emptiness of the vault room, Dante finally set the gun down on the table beside the scattered, blood-flecked ledger, exhaling like a man setting down a weight he'd carried far longer than one night. "My mother left me a family in pieces," he said. "A fiancé who was selling secrets before her body was even cold in the ground. A ledger that could start a war. And apparently," he added, quieter, "the only person in this house who never once lied to me." "I'm not special," Isabella said. "I just kept a promise. You're the only one who did." He reached for her hand, hesitant in a way that seemed foreign to a man built entirely of certainty. And when she didn't pull away, something in his shoulders eased. 2 years you've been in this house. 2 years I walked past you in these halls and never once stopped to learn anything about you beyond the fact that the floors were always clean when I came home. My mother saw you in a week what it took me 2 years to miss entirely. You were grieving your mother and running an empire that apparently wanted you dead," Isabella said gently. "I don't fault you for not noticing the housekeeper. I fault myself for it." His thumb traced absent circles over her knuckles, and the gesture felt more intimate than anything that had happened between them all night. "You stood in front of a locked vault and let 3 of my men choke you rather than break a promise to a dying woman. You had every reason to run when that gun came up, and instead you found a way to save my life. I don't know what to call that except exactly the kind of loyalty this family has been starving for. If you've made it this far with Isabella through everything she survived tonight, don't disappear before she gets the ending she's earned. Hit subscribe, because what happens between her and Dante in the weeks after this vault opens is going to break your heart in the best possible way." Isabella looked down at the wreckage around them. Torn documents, a bullet lodged in steel, the ghost of Camilla's betrayal still hanging in the air like smoke that hadn't cleared. "What happens now?" she asked. "To the ledger, to the war Camilla might have already started." "Now," Dante said, "I do what my mother should have trusted me to do from the beginning. I face it, openly. No more hiding debts in vaults. No more secrets that get people I care about choked in hallways." His eyes found hers again, steadier now. "And I do it with someone standing beside me who's already proven she won't run when things get difficult. If she's willing, that's a lot to offer someone you accused of theft 3 hours ago." "That's the version of tonight where I was wrong about everything that mattered," Dante said, the ghost of something almost like a smile touching his mouth despite the blood still drying on his lip. "I'd like the chance to be right about the rest of it." Weeks later, the house looked different. Not because the marble had changed or the tattoos on Dante's arms had faded, but because the coldness his mother once complained about had thawed into something warmer, staff greeting each other by name in hallways that used to echo with silence. Isabella no longer wore a uniform. She wore, instead, a quiet authority of her own, standing beside Dante at the head of a table where the Calabrese family's representatives sat across from him. The ledger open and unredacted between them, every debt accounted for, every secret finally dragged into daylight where it could no longer be used as a weapon. The war Camilla had threatened never came. Not because the danger wasn't real, but because Dante, with Isabella's steadiness anchoring him, had chosen transparency over concealment, and the families who'd once circled like sharks found nothing left to exploit. Camilla was never seen in the city again. The man who'd held a gun on them that night vanished into whatever consequences the underworld reserved for hired failures, and Dante never asked, and Isabella never wondered, because some doors were better left closed. What she kept, instead, was the vault key Dante placed in her palm one evening. Unprompted, no ceremony to it, just his hand closing over hers the way it had that first terrifying night. Except this time there was nothing to guard against. Only everything left to build. You never needed the promise to stay, he told her. I just needed you to know I finally saw that too. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us to tell it, don't scroll past without hitting like, dropping a comment about the moment that hit hardest, and subscribing so you never miss the next story where love finds the people everyone else overlooked.